What's up, everyone? This is Kurt coming back to you for the Lionshare Poker Academy. Hoping to wrap this Sunday Million Series up in the third and final part here. I think it's gone on a little longer than I had intended, so we're really going to try our best to get through the rest of the hands here. And yeah, I'm gonna try not to spend a whole lot of time on pretty simplified situations we run into, but we'll go into further detail in some of the more complicated spots. So I think we left off with the Pocket King, so we're going to kick it off from here. Pretty loose with the Queen 9, but I think standard. Very dry board. Big blind's going to have a lot of crap. I think we're just going to be betting a lot of our hands there, especially when we have top pair, good kicker. Same with this situation, super dry board. This player is fairly short stacked, so I probably use a smaller bet size than I'm used to. I also think he's not going to be able to defend appropriately, even versus a smaller bet size. This is where the hand got kind of close. I don't mind checking here. Blocking his backdoor club floats kind of sucks. Blocking his, like, let's say 6-5, 6-3 that are going to fold two bets is kind of bad. So, and I don't like it for that reasoning, but I also don't think it's terrible. We can put on some pressure. He's going to have just like some bear 4x, 2x, maybe even bear 3 and 5x that had a backdoor that didn't get there. So I don't mind. I'm sure this hand gets in there at some frequency, so it's not the worst, but also not the greatest with the blockers. I'd rather be bluffing a hand like, let's say, Jack 10 of hearts that really doesn't block any of his backdoor, let's say, suit floats, as well as some straight draws he's going to have to give up with. So, but I think it's fine. Just putting on some extra pressure on a board that's mainly going to be better for us than it is for him. So this spot is close to. We're certainly not going to be c-betting off our whole range here. We don't have enough of a range advantage. Big blind's going to have a lot of straight draws, open-ended, or straight draws, flush draws, a lot of pairs on this board. So big blind's going to hit this board a fair amount too. So that means we're going to have to mix in some checks with our range, but then we're also going to mix in some small and big bets. I would say mostly bigger bets on this board. That being said, I think this hand is a bit of a mix. I kind of like checking a little more with the without a spade than with a spade. I won't go too into detail with that. I think it's just fine to be mixing in the spot. I'm certainly fine with betting as well. It's great to be checking here because then we can still have the nuts in our range when we do hit it like this. I also expect our villain to be attacking pretty hard when we hit cards that are good for us as well. So I think that's a decent reason to check. You could have raised here. I think if we were a little deeper, I would think about it. But even if this player checks, there's still going to be about 80K in there. So we can still get the chips in. It's a bit of an overbet, but I still think it'll be fine in that situation. He's betting pretty big here, so I want to allow him to continue to put pressure on what. And it looks like I have a fairly weak range. I would say I'm fairly capped mostly around, let's say, Jack 10 clubs, something like that. So one of the better hands I can have. And then obviously I have very few combinations of the nuts. Maybe I have some 10-9 of clubs here too. Won't go on too much about that. Facing a block bet, I wasn't sure if this was good. It might be at second glance, although I still think this player can play for chips with, let's say, King 10 plus. Essentially because, for the most part, I don't have a lot of 9x, and I'm not checking a lot of overpairs in this board. So I do have some 9x for sure. I'm going to be checking some of my weaker 9x here, but I would say that is a very small part of what my overall range is going to be in the spot. So I certainly think this player can play for all of his chips, at least, with, let's say, King 10. And I'd probably even throw it in there with Queen 10 as well. So if I'm in this player's shoes, I'd be jamming a lot. I'm going to do the same with some, let's say, weaker flush draws, like lower flush draws, some straight draws that bricked out. So I'm going to be wanting to put max pressure on in this guy's spot. That being said, he does go for the block. I felt like this was kind of a, like, Jack 10, a Queen 10 type range that he wasn't really seeing, that he could be getting more value for this, and maybe he's scared by the 9, so that's why he sized down. I don't think, at second glance, sizing down is really a thing, but he did end up having a hand that I wasn't expecting with the 9, so kind of interesting that I was definitely off in the strength of his range because I didn't think he would bet the size with the 9. So kind of interesting. I might look back at that and see if his river line is a thing, although I don't think it is. I could be wrong. And then, yeah, once he jams, I think he has to call. He blocks the straights. He's just so high up in his range and value, and we're going to have to find some bluffs there in that spot, because we can't just allow him to bet for the small size and we just fold a lot. Otherwise, he'd be printing. This is loose as well, but we have a lot of chips at the table here. So I'm going to be a little more active than I normally would be, getting kind of later into the tournament. I believe I bet here, which I don't hate it, but I think I would rather check here. I would certainly check pocket tens 100% of the time, because we'd be blocking some top pair hands that our villains could be continuing with. So I hate it less with the pocket fours. That being said, this is just a super dry board, and our hand is obviously, essentially the nuts and needs very little protection. We can mix in some check calls, some check raises here from this player, and just allow them to potentially start bluffing. But that being said, I don't hate this. Small bet is fine. Going back to me having a lot of chips, I'm probably going to be betting certain boards a little more aggressively than I would at equilibrium. So maybe that's what I was thinking in game. Again, I don't hate it, but I think checking is a little more optimal. And then once we turn the full house, we really don't need that much protection. The only river that really sucks for us is a 10 potentially. I even think this player is going to check raise a fair amount of his 10x as well in this spot. So I think he can have a lot weaker than just 10x here. So when we check, we allow him to bluff, let's say some 3-5, some 3-6 suited, maybe he even turns ace-3 into a bluff. He could have, if he's getting real saucy, maybe set like a queen-9, a diamonds float, although I think that's optimistic. But anyway, I think this player's range can be pretty weak here, so another reason I don't really want to be putting in chips when we essentially have the board locked down. And then we can bet for the all-in size here. I think this is fine, because obviously, as you see, we're in a spot where we are still uncapped if we're checking the nuts on the turn sometimes. So we definitely have the nuts here still, which allows us to use this bigger bet size. This also allows us to put maximum pressure on, let's say, his 4x and 2x, his pocket threes, that he would have to defend, or that he would be able to defend against a lot easier had I bet around 60,000. But when I bet for his entire stack, I think this puts a lot more pressure on that decision, and his call would get a little more thin. So I'm essentially trying to maximize my value when I have the nuts and put on max pressure when I am bluffing. That being said, he did call. I was expecting a lot of check folds here. I don't think a lot of people are trapping enough with their 10x ranges here to allow these players to bluff. So it's kind of good that he did show up with a 10, and this is the kind of 10 I would expect him to show up with, one of the weaker ones for sure. So I actually think this is pretty well played on his part. I don't think, if I'm bluffing appropriately, that he can never fold in this spot either. And then if he is going to have some 10x in his checking range, some of his weaker ones would be better candidates to balance out his checking range, make sure he's not too weak when he's always checking. So I think pretty well played hand by this player, even though he called it off and ended up losing. Just going to go for the call here. I think I was a little skeptical about that. I don't know what this guy's range is going to be, or I guess I was most afraid to see a limp jam from this player, and then I would assume this player would isolate, and then we just have to fold 3.5 blinds. But this hand's just too strong to think about anything else with other than calling, and just going to fold versus a small bet. Even though we have some backdoors, I think this range is going to be a little tighter than it normally would be. Obviously, he is raising against a fairly short stack player who's probably on the weaker side. So I don't think he's just doing it super wide, because there's a chance this person limp jams and he essentially has to call off anything he's opening once he 3.5s it. This player is only 14 effective, so I think his range is going to be a little stronger than it normally would had he just opened from the cutoff or the hijack. So a bit of a tight fold here, even versus a smaller size, and we still have to worry about what this player is going to do. So in normal situations, this would be an easy continue, but for reasons I just stated, I think we probably just have to make a tight fold there. Ace-3, just going to flick it in. We would definitely want some ace-x in our calling range here. Some of our weak ace-x is fine. I don't think 3-betting is terrible either, but against a bunch of unknown players, I'm really just trying to play post-flop. I think my edge is pretty high in that department, so I'm not really trying to make thin 3-bets out of position when stacks are deep. Check on the flop and check on the turn as well. When I see this line, he can certainly have some checks on this board. I'm going to hit the flop a fair amount. I'm going to have some straight draws, flush draws, backdoor flush draws, obviously some ace-x. So I think there's a fair amount of hands I'm continuing. So I'm fine with him having a small check back range, and then probably throw some bigger bets in his range as well. When he checks twice, I'm thinking at best, he probably has a hand that's similar to mine with the ace-3. So it's essentially, what do we get called by if we bet? I think there's a fair amount of pocket kings, pocket jacks, no spade. And then, I mean, even some 9x is going to be in his check back range, so he does improve to trips here sometimes. So I was essentially thinking, is it better for us to bet for value, or do we check and allow him to bluff with some, let's say he just decided to check back flop with a jack 10 of diamonds and has very little equity. I think that would be a good candidate to check on the flop and then bet the river. So question is, does he call me more with those pocket kings, pocket jacks type hands when we bet, or does he bluff into us a little bit more when we check? I think both things probably happen, but I'm not expecting to make a whole lot of money in the spot. I'm not particularly fond one way or the other over betting versus checking. And then we see he has the king 10, which is probably fine enough to show down. We wouldn't have got paid, obviously, if we had bet, unless he's really making a hero. So, yeah, kind of an interesting spot. I mean, not so much because it was a big pot, but it's essentially on the river. Do we have more value in betting or more value in checking and letting him call a bluff? So it really kind of depends on what these players' ranges really are, and we're never 100% going to know that. So it's just best for us to make assumptions on our own range. Those factors are known. Our opponent's factors will never be known. Again, pretty loose open with the ace-deuce suited. I'm not sure exactly what I did. I wouldn't hate a bet here. I mean, we essentially have no 4x here unless it's pocket 4s or ace-4 suited. We also have pocket 5s here. Again, kind of a loose open from early position, but we have a lot of chips, so I don't mind opening a little more aggressively. Don't mind the check here, mainly because I think I want to do this with a lot of my overpairs as well, just so we make some strong hands into our checking range. And then once this player checks again, I think he can still be uncapped to 4x and 5s full, quad 4s, things of that nature. So this player definitely has some strong hands. I think this player is probably going to be capped towards if he's ever checking back like a pocket 7s and then some jack x. So I would assume this player's range is still stronger than this one's. And when he folds, I'm assuming this is either jack x, or let's say maybe he calls an ace-3 here, although I think that would be thin when I'm betting into two people. So I would assume this range is mostly jack x and clubs. So when the clubs get there on the river, I think our hand is still strong enough to value bet with, because he's still going to have jack x here. That's probably going to check on a river card like this, and we want to get value. And then when we have some bluffs here, like I might even turn a hand like ace-3 into a bluff here, because I don't think we'd be able to show that down had this river come. But anyway, we're going to bet small, basically because a lot gets there. If I ever do have 6-7, that gets there. The ace-deuce obviously gets there. And then if, say, I have a hand like ace-jack, I think I still want to bet small. I don't want to allow him the chance to hero fold like a jack 10 of diamonds if I bet for the big size, which I definitely think would fold at a frequency. So I think it's okay for us to have small bets with a portion of our range, and then big bets as well with more of the full house and flush combinations. And then hands like this that I would assume the only things that are going to call with a straight are jack x, and that's what he does here. So yeah, I even think that he might be able to hero fold had I bet like 3/4 in this spot. Anywhere from 3/4 plus. So not to say that he does. I mean, maybe he calls a bigger bet, but I would certainly think at equilibrium he's not supposed to be calling that hand at 100% frequency versus a bigger bet there. So pretty happy with the way that worked out. Versus a min raise here, we're going to be defending the majority of our range here. Pretty easy call on the flop. And then on the turn, I think we're just trying to check down. We have showdown value and also pretty good equity. If this opponent has like 10x or 9x with our open ender, we might even be able to turn our hand into a bluff on certain runouts depending, but mostly we're just going to try to check this one down with our showdown value. And he has the 9-6 off. I don't know what this raise is here. The size is bad, the hand selection is bad. Not going to talk about that too much though. And gonna flick it in here. We're all pretty deep stacked, and these suited connectors play pretty well when deep stacked, even though we have the worst position at the table. I'm still fine with flicking it in here. This player betting into 3 opponents, I'm gonna assume this is going to be a fairly strong range. I mean, he has to be pretty strong, even on a fairly dry board here, when he's betting into 3 opponents. I decided to call. I wanted to say that this probably would be a decent candidate to throw into our check raise range. We could really put some pressure on let's say if he's betting a hand as thin as Jack 10, let's say Jack 10 of clubs, at equilibrium, he may even just have to fold the flop just because of what the overall tightness of ranges should be and how few bluffs I should really have in this spot. So since this range is so tight and I shouldn't have a ton of bluffs with this many players in the hand, I think we can kind of dig down and reach into some hands that we kind of want to like merge bluff, I guess is the word I'm looking to say. So I think a hand like this is a good candidate for it. We really put pressure. Even if he has a hand like pocket kings, like, are you happy when you bet here into 3 opponents and then you get check raised here and you have pocket kings on a board like this? Like essentially, this player is uncapped to 7-6 suited, 6s, 7s, probably doesn't have pocket jacks here. But I would say if this opponent is check raising versus an opponent who's betting into 3 people, this range is in general going to be weighted more towards strong hands than bluffs. So I kind of like taking this hand and check raising this particular spot. I think in game I didn't, just because of what I had said earlier with this player's range being a little stronger than it probably should be when he's betting into multiple opponents. So I don't hate calling, but I definitely think this would be good. Trying to turn this hand into a bluff. It's obviously great when we turn a 6, we pick up additional equity when we turn hearts, and we also turn open enders both with an 8 and a 4. So I think this is actually a really good hand to turn our hand into a bluff on the flop. I'm fine with check calling. I'm sure it doesn't pure bluff, but I think it's a pretty good spot for it. And then again, when we're also uncapped to 4-5, this player doesn't have it that often either. I would say he should certainly be checking back with some of his Jack X in this particular spot. So when I see him double barrel, I'm thinking his range is really strong. And even though we pick up additional equity with a gut shot straight, I still don't think this hand has quite enough equity to continue because I think this range is just going to be too strong. So it's kind of okay with a fold there. A lot going on in that hand. So gonna limp here on the button versus this limp here. I'm not really trying to play for stacks 20 effective. We're going to have position. This hand plays pretty well multi-way. Obviously flopping the second nuts pretty good. So we're gonna start putting money in here because the pot's pretty small because it was an unraised pot. When we get called here, I think we're just trying to play for stacks. I'm blocking the jacks very nice. I kind of want to make it a size where maybe some of his flush draws continue. He's definitely going to have king X of hearts here sometimes as well. So I expect to get called here a lot and definitely want to be building a pot. And then obviously we're just going to be jamming on the river. He has a little less than pot. So, and yeah, we run into the pocket jacks. Not a whole lot to be said there. I think everything's pretty standard the way that played out. This is pretty close. I think 5s probably don't get in there. 6s might be close to mixing, but maybe it's pure here. Betting or checking are fine here. Once this player checks, it's a pretty dry board, and this is essentially the weakest pair we're going to be calling in this position, so we never have pocket 4s, pocket 3s. But we are going to have a lot of queen X, like ace queen, king queen suited, queen jack suited, queen 10 suited might not get in there, so we're going to have a fair amount of queen X and then some pocket pairs here. I don't mind checking, but usually you want to be turning your weakest pairs into bluffs, and since 6s is one of my weakest pairs here, I decided to bet here. I'd be a little more inclined to check 8s, 9s, and 10s and kind of bet this one for a little value / protection. So checking's certainly fine there too, though. And this spot, I think if this player was right here, we'd have a really easy jam for about 35 effective. That being said, I still don't hate 3-betting to either 3-bet fold. I think jamming might be a little ambitious from the hijack, although it might be fine. Calling is certainly fine too. I think we can do really all 3 options. I think I like calling slightly more than jamming. Probably just 3-bet folding a little more than jamming too. So I'm not sure. You can essentially do anything here and it's probably fine. But this player checks. Yeah, I'm really not too sure what this range is. He should have a few more checks in his range when we're calling from the small blind because our range is going to be a little tighter. Had we call from the big blind, it's also a pretty dry board. I would expect him to be betting a fair amount here. So when he checks, I think we can do a couple things. I don't mind betting here. We're going to have queen 9 at suited full frequency. We are definitely going to have jack 10 suited here at some frequency, pocket 4s, and then we're going to have some flush draws here and a hand like this. So I actually don't mind checking to check raise or just betting ourselves, or even check calling might be fine. So another spot where we can pretty much do whatever we want, and I'm pretty much fine with it. We can also potentially bluff some rivers. In this spot, I was thinking that this might be a little too high up in our range to be checking down. or to be turning into a bluff. So I just decided to check here. In hindsight, I'm not sure if this hand is strong enough to be showing down. I mean, I expect to lose to a hand like this quite often as well. That being said, I'm just curious if we should be pure bluffing here or mixing give ups and bets here. Really kind of depends on what this player's range is, but I thought in game that we might be a little high up in our range to be bluffing here. That being said, that might not be the case. So got a pure call here with the ace-4 suited versus early position. He bets a little less than half pot, which is probably fine. He should be having a lot of checks here. He essentially never has the nuts with 5-7 suited. He doesn't open that hand. Even pocket fours mostly folds. 8-6 suited folds. 6-4 suited folds. So he's really kind of limited to, let's say, pocket eights and overpairs and then some good flush draws. So I expect to see a lot of checks here, which is why I think he could actually size up the times he bets here, because he certainly wants to be more polarized. It's definitely going to be a better board for me than him. That being said, I think equities are going to be close because of his positional advantage on top of that. I think when we face a bet, our only option is to really check call. And then on this run out, blocking could certainly be an option. I honestly wouldn't be that upset if we did block. This run out is just going to be so advantageous for us. He's not going to have 5x very often. We also do put some pressure on him if he does have the occasional ace-2 suited, ace-3 suited. So yeah, and then also when we block, let's say if he has a hand like ace-6 suited or ace-8 suited, he's probably just going to call even if we block, so we kind of set our price as well. And then it's kind of nice when we if we just bluff and we don't show our hand, because that way, I mean, anytime we don't have to show our hand at showdown, I think is pretty advantageous, not having to give away information. So we had the pocket 7. So yeah, we would have ended up losing a little bit more money than we did had we just checked, and our opponent checks back as well. But this board is just so good for us, and I expect to get raised so infrequently. I think we can just bet a lot here and potentially get called by worse, and then kind of set our price when our opponent has a hand like this. I think in game I was thinking that if he's betting this board, he's probably going to be a little more weighted towards value than he's going to bluffs. So maybe that's why I decided to check. I don't hate checking either by any means, but maybe another option could have happened. Loose open with queen 3 suited. I think it's fine though. Decided to bet. Fairly dry board. We can turn an open-ender with a deuce or a 6. We have the backdoor flush draw to go along with it. Definitely loose, but I don't hate it. Then when we turn the queen, mostly probably just trying to show down here. We still beat some pocket 7s, pocket 8s, ace-4, ace-5 suited. So we definitely have showdown versus this opponent, but probably too weak to be betting for value. And he kind of surprises me with the king-jack suited here. I expected, I think his turn check is fine. I think he probably wants to mix with a hand like this, but definitely once it checks again on the river, he's missing a street of value. What this tells me is he's just not able to value bet thinly enough because he doesn't understand how strong his hand is in this spot, or he's just thinking that an opponent like myself might be capable of having some check raise bluffs here, and he doesn't want to be put into a tough situation. I'm not familiar with this opponent, so I'm not going to assume that's the case. I'm assuming he just didn't realize that he had a little more value than he thought he did, so I think a missed street of value from that opponent and allowed us to get off pretty easy. If we faced a bet there, I think we would have had a pretty tough decision on the river. With king jack here, I think I actually prefer to 3-bet. This hand plays a little worse. At 50 big blinds, these offsuit combos play a little worse as calls. So I think I would have preferred to mix in a 3-bet. That being said, I think calling is fine. But when we're playing with a hand like this, that I do think this is 100% VPIPs for sure. I'm not saying we should fold, but I just think it plays better as a 3-bet. Has good blockers to the strongest hands. If we get them to fold, that's a pretty big win for us. And we really don't want to be playing a lot of bloated pots out of position against a guy who has us out-chipped. So yeah, again, calling's fine, but I think I prefer 3-betting. And then we're just going to fold. This might look tight, but this player's range should be pretty tight. Betting into 2 opponents here on the monotone board here, we would certainly be continuing if we had a diamond. I even think we're supposed to fold, let's say, some ace-3 of clubs in this spot. So I'm not sure if people realize how tight this is supposed to be in positions like this when we have a villain betting into 2 different opponents, not just one. So that means this range is going to be tighter in general when he's betting. So that means our defending range has to be tighter as well. So I felt pretty comfortable just check folding the king jack there. Similar situation. I'm a little more happy with calling in this spot because of our positional advantage here. So I also think three betting could be a thing as well. And again, on this flop, I think checking and betting are both fine. I prefer to, or I like betting this hand with the heart because we have some additional equity when we are called and end up needing to turn our hand into a bluff at certain times. When he just check calls, I would assume he's probably going to be check raising the majority of his ace jack plus. I would say pocket eights and pocket sixes want to check raise here a lot because this board's pretty wet. So there's going to be a lot of hands that I'm going to be continuing versus a check raise. So I think he's going to want to be putting in money immediately when he has the top of his range here. So when he check calls, I think he might be a little more capped than he normally would be, mostly around the jack 10, queen jack area. And then I think he's just going to have a lot of, let's say ace 8 of clubs, maybe some ace 6 of diamonds. He's just check calling one street, then like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, maybe even pocket 7s with a heart. So I think the majority of his range is just going to be like weaker jack X and then some weaker pairs. So I decided to put on a little extra pressure here. Also, we have some pretty clean outs if he does check call with the queen or the king, if he does decide to continue. And then I just think this bet is going to get through a lot as well because of the range that I ended up putting him on when I was thinking about the types of hands he could have. So that made me want to be a little more aggressive in the spot. And I'm pretty sure I like my double barrel there. Getting pretty loose open with king deuce suited, but I think it's fine. Versus the small blind call, I think this range is going to contain a lot of 7-8 suited, suited jacks, maybe even some king jack offsuit here, pocket 4 certainly. So even though this is a pretty dry board, we might want to work some checks in here. We're kind of low in our range here. I prefer to check a hand like king 9 of clubs with the backdoor straight equity as well. A hand like this that does at least have some backdoor flushes going for it and an overcard to the jack. I'm kind of okay just going for a cheap bluff here and trying to take it down. I certainly think checking is fine as well. But yeah, we get check raise and we just don't have enough equity to continue, so we're just going to fold. And close spot here, I'm pretty sure I prefer squeezing over calling. That being said, I don't think I hate calling. I think this player can still have some stronger hands, although this player is opening from fairly early position, meaning that he should have a stronger range. So I would assume this player should have a few less traps in this spot. There's not really a ton of shove stacks behind, so I don't see him trapping that much. So this range might be a little on the weaker side and less trap heavy. So that being said, I guess I don't mind flicking it in with the king queen. This hand might be a little stronger, knowing that this player isn't probably trapping as wide as he should. This player's range is pretty strong as well. I would prefer to, yeah, I mean, this is fine. I'm not going to get into it too much. Calling's fine. I think 3-betting is fine as well. Obviously, if this player jammed over our 3-bet squeeze, we would have to fold. But I expect if this player folds, for this player to be folding a lot as well from him having a perceived weaker range than he probably should. And pretty easy open here with queen jack suited. This is kind of close as well. We shouldn't have 8. I think essentially 10-9 is the threshold for opening suited connectors from under the gun. Again, the fact that, I mean, we only have 35 bigs now, so it's not like we have a ton of chips. So I probably don't have straights in my range here. That being said, I have full weight jack 10 suited, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket 7s, then obviously kings plus, and then we're going to have hands like jack 9 suited, 10-9 suited that have a pair with a straight draw. So we're still pretty strong here. So we can't have the absolute nuts, but we still have hands that we can easily stack off to. This player for 18 bigs should essentially never have pocket 10s, pocket jacks, and then he's obviously going to have his jack 10 offsuits, 9-8 offsuits, and then suited jack 7, 10-7. So I would say equities are probably pretty close. We probably still do have an equity advantage. So I wouldn't hate mixing in some checks here. In game, I decided to bet small, which I don't hate. Yeah, again, checking could be fine. And now when we pick up the extra equity with the spades, even though I think queen jack's kind of close on the flop, I think it can definitely check back flop. So when we decide to bet, I think it would be a decent candidate to check back and kind of disguise the strength of our hand and really make our decision. We're going to be able to call most rivers, so that really makes the decision easy for us when we just check turn, don't blow the pot. But when we pick up the extra spade equity, I think I just mostly want to be betting here. One, because we can still have the best hand, and two, the times that we don't, we can get there with our backdoor flush draw as well. So, and then we can easily stack off if this player decides to check jam. So that's essentially why I decided to bet turn. And then on this river, we just don't have a strong enough hand to be going for value on the river. And yeah, he has a king jack. So again, another one of those situations where the few times that we're behind, we can actually end up stacking off. Had this player had us out pipped like he did here. Just gonna check how many hands we have real quick and see how long we've been going for. I'm going for about a half hour, so really gonna try to get through these. If we can finish this in 45 minutes, that would be good. For 16 big blinds, I think we're just stacking off versus this player always. I don't know what this player's flatting here. Maybe he has some traps, but versus a 16 big blind open, I wouldn't expect this player to have too many flats here that are on the strong side. I think this is probably him just flatting too wide of a range here, so I think this player is going to be folding a lot. And I would have been okay playing for stacks with this player anyway with ace queen. Then when you put the additional money in there, it's a very easy decision. We end up getting lucky against pocket kings. Pretty easy call here. It's kind of close between jamming and calling. I think if this player was in the hijack, it would certainly be closer, and then it would just be a pure jam had he been in the cutoff. So I guess I'm okay with a spot that I thought was pretty close. Again, this player could be opening a little wider because he does have one of the bigger stacks, but if I think it's close, I'm probably going to take the low variance route. Having no clubs here, I think it's just a pretty easy fold versus bet. I'm pretty sure this is a decent 3-bet spot. I think I like 3-betting more than calling, but I like folding more than calling as well. So yeah, I think this is a decent spot to 3-bet bluff here. Then a very good board for our hand. We're going to be able to bet really small at a pretty high frequency, and he's just not going to be able to defend appropriately from out of position. So pretty happy with my size there. Easy open with the king jack suited. We can do a couple different things here. I don't mind checking. I don't mind betting either. We decided to check. There's not a whole lot to say about that. Our hand also does have a little bit of showdown value here, so I don't mind throwing in some checks with some flush draws here, and then maybe betting with some weaker flush draws, just trying to get an immediate fold with hands that have less showdown. I'm okay with checking again here. We can easily check call. I would say, I mean, we still do have the best hand here sometimes. So I don't mind checking and disguising our flush draw and just potentially showing down the best hand. Now when the jack gets here, I essentially feel like I have the nuts. I would assume, I really question whether, I actually think this hand is strong enough to check raise for value. I don't think enough people would be slow playing, let's say, an ace-5 suited here, which I think would be fine, but it would definitely be very rare to see this. So I actually think we could potentially check jam this for value had he bet the river. So by checking, it would allow him to bluff the times he has 0 showdown value. And then we would also be able to get max value if we decide to go for the check jam, as opposed to just, 3x pot jam here on the river and hope that he heroes off with something. So yeah, I actually think our hand is strong enough to check jam, as crazy as it might be, but I'm certainly fine with betting here. And if I do bet, since I think our hand is essentially the nuts, I think we can go for the overbet size with this hand. It might look really thin, but I think it's fine. Can't remember what I did in game, but I think we can make it like essentially 160-ish here and be okay. Yeah, we just went for the pot size bet, which I think is fine. The other thing about that is that I would suppose the majority of his hero calling range in this spot is going to be Jack X, and then of course it's less likely our opponent has Jack X when we block that. So maybe that's why I decided to go for the smaller size in that spot. So yeah, kind of an interesting spot, although, I mean, it didn't play out too interesting, but a lot of different things could have happened on that river, I thought. So had the potential to be interesting for sure. Easy call here with King 5 suited. Versus small c-bet, I think check calling might be fine. With I'd rather check call, let's say King 8, King 9, and then check raise more with the King 4, King 5, King 6, just because they are a little lower in value here and they make worse straights. I think check calling might be fine, but I probably prefer to check raise in a spot like this. I think check folding would be a little too tight versus a small bet. And then versus this bet, which I don't think is a thing, the size is not a thing anyway, we just don't have enough equity to continue even versus a small bet. Pretty confused by that size, but it doesn't really matter. Pretty easy check fold with the 10-8. And we could raise here. Limping's also fine too. We'd be limping to call versus an ISO. We can really do anything here. Kind of the same with the flop. I don't mind betting or checking here. We decide to bet a little bit on the bigger side. Our hand is likely the nuts right now. There's a lot of turns that could certainly change the equities that both opponents have here. So just want to put in some money or get in a lot of money here when we likely have the best hand. Check raising there is certainly fine too. This might be a little thin, or it might be fine. I'm still trying to brush up on these multi-way spots because I think not only myself, but many people are defending too wide in these multi-way spots. That being said, I think Jack 9's probably just good enough to get in there. And then in this spot, we are essentially going to have a pure call range. I'm going to have to get into more detail in another video that kind of breaks down these multi-way spots. But essentially, the short answer is I'm not going to have a raising range here. So we're just going to call when there's an uncapped range here as well. As played, yeah, I remember I tanked for a long time here. So this is probably going to be the hand that I got to talk a lot, but I'm just going to try to fly through it. So essentially, I think for chips, we probably have to call, like in a chip EV spot, we just have to call. Excuse me. We block no flush draws that our opponent could be playing strongly here. We do block the spades. I would be a little bit better calling this off had we unblocked spade draws as well, like the ace-9 suited, the king-9 suited, things of this nature. So I did really tank for a while. I'm not sure if this bet size is a thing from our opponent, but it might be fine. Say he has a hand like ace-jack. I probably don't mind this because he likely has the best hand value-wise, and there's a lot of rivers that he's not going to be able to bet a third street of value with. So his bet size is probably fine. The thing is, there's still spots where we're essentially going to be dead. I don't expect him to have like sets in the spot. Like he shouldn't have 10s and 7s and be playing it this way. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if some random opponents did that. I think he can certainly play Jack 10 like this for value. So there's hands that we're essentially dead to that we're going to need to get pretty lucky. So the fact that I think this range is probably just going to be tighter than it should be, I decided to make a really tight fold here. And this kind of plays into the ICM component where we are getting close to day 2, close to only 100 players left in an 11,000 player field. So I essentially just said, am I going to find better spots than this in the future? I think the spot is really close here. Yes, there are some good players left, but there's going to be a lot of random players in there as well. And if I can just fold here, still have 25 big blinds, I think I have a lot of maneuverability throughout the remainder of the tournament, so I didn't really mind passing up on a spot like this, although I did use quite a bit of my time bank. So yeah, I ended up making the fold. I'd be pretty interested to see what you guys have to say about that hand, certainly on the tight side, but for reasons previously stated, I didn't hate myself as much as I thought I might looking back at it, so that's good to see. This board, I think we can bet pretty high frequency. Our hand's worth almost anything, so I don't mind just trying to take it down right now. Obviously, we'll probably have to give up on a lot of turn cards. That being said, we do get lucky enough to turn a pair, so we are ahead of just unpaired club draws now. That being said, I want to say that I ended up calling here, and I'm trying to remember the reasons why. So this kind of sucks because we don't block 10-9 either, which is obviously not good because when we improve to our pair, our opponent clearly improves to a straight. I think having not having a club is kind of good here because our opponent is likely going to have to bluff every non-paired club that he was check calling with that aren't ace high. Essentially, club hands that have very little showdown value. Like let's say our opponent has a hand like king 6 with the king of clubs. I think he should be bluffing here almost always. So I think not having a club is pretty good. I also think some opponents may fast play their flushes a little more than they should. So when he check calls, I think his range may be a little weaker than it should be. Also, when he bets for the bigger size, I think this is mostly going to be, let's say, strong. I mean, if he has a hand like king jack with the king of clubs, I think he can bet pretty big for value. But then I also think like a lot of weaker jacks are going to have to use a block bet size. He could even block bet like an 8 in this spot. So when he uses a bigger size, I think his range is a little more polarized to the strongest Jack X and then some slow played flushes. So I guess that's what I was trying to unblock the most. And also, yeah, again, it sucks because I unblocked 10-9. He could certainly be betting for the bigger size, but I did decide to flick it in here because I think this range is going to be kind of narrow, and yeah, it might not be great. I think we ended up, oh yeah, I was actually going to say I thought we ended up losing this hand. This is actually one of these hands that I was expecting him to just show down because I think he does still beat some hands in my range here. So I would expect him to check back some ace high hands that had clubs in them and then bluff all the other ones that have less showdown than the ace high here. So I was a little surprised to see him bluffing an ace high hand in the spot, which I think makes the call a little bit better. If he's bluffing hands that he shouldn't be, that probably means he's going to be weaker when he does bluff than he should be. So yeah, another interesting spot there. I'm definitely going to want to look that up to see our C betting frequency on the flop and then see how good our hand is as a hero call on the river. Pretty easy defend here with a 9 deuce suited. We're going to be defending the majority of our suited combos in the big blind. And then we're just going to check call here. I don't think there's any other choice versus a small bet. Getting pretty lucky to turn trips here. And now the question becomes, what do we want to do with our trips? I would assume our opponent isn't trapping flushes as much as they should be. He could be getting tricky and definitely check some pocket kings at this SPR. I don't expect him to have pocket threes in his range. He could have ace deuce suited, but there's obviously only one combination of that when we block the deuce ourselves. So I'm guessing our opponent's strongest hands here are going to be some ace king, maybe some weak flushes if he decides to check back, let's say the 8-9 of diamonds. So I normally expect our hand to be the nuts here. That being said, I think I did consider check jamming on the river. And I also think this player may be a regular, so I think he might value bet and bluff as much as he should, which makes me want to trap a little bit more. But in general, again, especially since we're getting a little late into the tournament, I don't think people are going to, one, bluff enough, and two, bet thinly enough for value when they should. So that kind of took away the check jam component for me and just wanting to bet big myself. The question is, what size do we bet? With our hand strength here, we definitely want to bet on the bigger side. And now I'm thinking, do we bet for... do we want to bet for 3/4, or is our hand good enough to overbet? I think our hand is mostly the nuts, and I think his check back range might be a little, I don't know if it's a little weaker, but anyway, I just want to make sure that we get called in a spot where I think that we almost always have the nuts, but I don't think this player's range is the strongest. I actually thought I would have ended up potted. We ended up going for 3/4. I think that's fine too. Kind of an interesting spot to see what our hand is actually supposed to do and what size is actually preferred when turn goes check check. And I think this was basically the last hand we played of the day. I remember, I think I posted this in the Discord. We got a pretty crazy run out here with this player turning the straight and then him rivering his pair to give us the higher straight. So that's essentially how we ended the day. Day 2, we barely played any hands. I think this actually might be the last hand that we played of the day. Limping the queen 3, it's loose, but it's fine. On the ace, we could bet, but I think our queen high has a fair amount of showdown, so I think I just wanted to try to show our hand down. Then when our opponent bets, I think our hand's probably not strong enough to call. I think I did consider check raising here, blocking the 3-5 or the 3-4 for the straight, but I do think our opponent probably has some ace X here. I also think people under bluff this spot too, because it just looks like I'm trying to check some showdown. And then when I have like less weak hands, and a lot of people should have in this spot, I think this spot usually ends up getting under bluff from the big blind when this ace is out here. Kind of rambling on that spot, but I'm just assuming that this spot is under bluff. So I did tank for a little while, whether or not I want to check raise bluff there or not. And yeah, it actually looks like this is the last hand. I guess the other ones are in the next day. Essentially, the 2 hands that we played, we ended up on the button with 30 bigs, and we had a 10 big blind stack here. So we had to end up raise calling versus the big blind with our jack 10. We ran into ace 8, didn't improve, and then we essentially just blinded our way around until we were down to about 12 big blinds. I think we ended up jamming from the low jack with our 12 bigs with pocket 5s, and then the big blind ended up waking up with pocket sixes and ended up holding. So that's essentially how our day 2 ended. I think we only lasted about 40 minutes. So unfortunate way to end it. We ended up finishing, I believe, 64th in an 11,000 player field. So a nice little run anyway. Thought we had some really good spots here. This series ended up going on a little longer than I thought it would, but I definitely think we got some good spots to talk about. I think I probably breezed through a lot of spots a little more than I wanted to. You guys could probably hear that I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm just trying to get everything out as quickly as possible. So definitely within this series, if we want to take a deeper dive into some of the more interesting hands here, I think that would be fine. If you guys have any suggestions for hands that we should get into or that you want to dive into a little deeper, just let me know. I might even do the first Pio Solver series, where we look at a couple of the interesting hands that we talked about from this 3-part series and kind of introduce you guys who are unfamiliar with Pio Solver to a few spots that we saw here. So yeah, we're just going to cut the series for now. I think this was definitely a fun series to run, and definitely a fun run last week. So yeah, we're going to cut it off for now. This has been Kurt for the Lionshare Poker Academy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.